Shalom, it's Moraliza, and today I am here to share a general or a generic history plan K through 8. For the most part, I do sit with the schedule. Sometimes I allow them to be, child-led or kind of get interested in one topic and we kind of roll along, in another one. But for the most part, this is what I tend to stick with as a template for history. And I've had several people ask me, so today I'm sharing. Okay, so kindergarten. Kindergarten, I mostly stick with like community helpers and African American bios. So of course, we're walking children through their community, the popular professions in the community and what those people do, who's safe, who's not, basic, safety, your phone number, knowing your mother's and your father's legal name, etc. So we pretty much understand what comes with community helpers. Also with that, I'm teaching African American bios. So it's very simple because they're like in kindergarten. And I do the same thing for even 4 and 5-year-olds. But I basically choose a letter and I work through the alphabet with them. It's not always A through Z. It depends on what's going on. But let's just start with A for example's sake. So A is for Asada, and I typically choose an African American bio that is the letter matches the first name and not the last name, just because that's not as easily understood for children when they're small. So let's say A is for Asada, and I will have a cardstock, and it'll have a complete portrait of Asada, and then I have little pieces of information that I want to share each day on her, and they're able to, I affix the portrait page up on the wall someplace. It's like our Black History wall, and we continue to go until we have, an A through Z type situation with 26 African American bios. Sometimes it does turn into more than 26 because children get interested in other persons as they learn about the particular person that I had planned for them. For the most part, it ends up being 26 African American bios, and I share a fact every single day on that person, something light and friendly that they can easily remember. Sometimes I make it rhyme or put it to a beat. Sometimes I make it like recitation work and they have to memorize that one sentence, or sometimes it's a phrase about that person. What it turns into, though, by the end of the year is that I can remove the person's name from the portrait, because the portrait does include their name and it includes their date of birth and their date of death if they are indeed deceased. What it turns into by the end of the school year is I can remove that name and I can point to any given person, and by sight, my kindergartners can tell me who that is. So they are able to look at it and go, oh, that's Muhammad Ali, or oh, that's Malcolm X, or oh, that's Oprah Winfrey, etc. All right, and so that's what I'm really working on in kindergarten, is just them having quick history facts, having that cultural presence. Sometimes we will connect that cultural presence to something else that they may already know or have been exposed to, just depending on, where the child is at and how Afrocentric or culturally aware their parents are. They'll make certain connections and whatnot. And the other thing that I'm kind of concentrated on is that visual pairing. So I really like when students are able to do that. I love when I'm able to take them on field trips, or we're looking in books or watching videos or whatever, and they instantly recognize, ooh, Morales, there goes Malcolm, X, or there goes Martin Luther King Jr. Like, I love when I go places and they can instantly know who that is. And oftentimes when we go to field trips that are African American based or Afrocentric, the guide or other Black parents there are going to ask anyway. So they'll be like, who knows who that is? Who can tell me who this is? And so I just love when they're able to immediately recognize, notable Black figures. So that is pretty much what we do for kindergarten. Moving on to first grade, I concentrate on more, I would say, national and state symbols. So obviously that state is going to depend on which state you reside in. And then I move into some geography with Me on the Map. So Me on the Map is a book, and I use it every single year in about grade 1. It's popular, it works, it gets the job done, where they understand the concept of, and I'm gonna go, work my way large to end. They begin with planet. They know that they are on planet Earth, and then they go to their continent, to their country, to their state, to their county, to their city or town, and then Me on the Map has them go all the way into their house, and then all the way into exactly where their room is in their house. So I kind of play with it a little bit, and we go backwards and forward and backwards and forward until they can tell me all of the information when I ask for it. What country do you live on? What continent do you live on, etc. And until they can build for me beginning at the bottom, so their room, and they can go my room, my house, my city, my county, etc. And they can do it the other way, starting at the top, planet. They can go down and say my planet, my continent, my country, whatever. So I pretty much stick with that until they can do that. There are lots of TPT units available for Me on a Map, and some teachers have even written it specifically for that state. So for us with Georgia's just popular, I don't know, on TPTs, a lot of Georgia teachers doing things. So they specifically had Me on the Map for Georgia students, and so that way your state and all that stuff will come with it. And then we do a lot of state study. So obviously in Georgia, they're gonna learn like what's grown here. We have the 4 P's, peaches, pecans, poultry, and peanuts. We learn our state song. It just so happens that our state song is recorded by an African American, Ray Charles. So we learn a little bit about him. What else do we learn in state study? Oh, the flower. What else? Just those major, state symbols. I do tell them about prominent African Americans who are from Georgia, and they learn like which cities they are. So they go a little bit more into like cities, the major cities in our state. When we're doing state study, I don't really do that with any other state in first grade, just the one that we are in. And I do teach them like just other notable persons that were born in Georgia or that, did something popular here in Georgia, whether they are of African descent or not. So for example, Jimmy Carter, they learn about him because he is a president who's from Georgia, an example. All right, and then I move into national symbols where they learn, the money, which they're learning money in first grade anyways in math, but we do a little bit more social studies. Who is that on that coin? And when they turn on the back, what is that? There's the capital, there's the eagle. What do those symbols mean? What does that stand for nationally speaking, as an American? So they get some Washington, D.C. stuff in there as well, with that being the capital. That is what I do for the first half of first grade. And then in the second half, I focus on like African American inventors. So in African American bios, I don't necessarily choose inventors because I know they're going to do inventors in first grade, even though I guess 1 or 2 can pop in. I'm doing like notable African Americans, the writers, the scientists, some athletes, and some actors, actresses, like things that they're going to see a lot, but I want them to know who they are. But in first grade, I focus on like inventors, a little bit more of what we have accomplished as a people being in America and what America has benefited off of us being here. And that's typically what I do in first grade. Then in second grade, I move into a geographical study of Africa. I put together a Africa study a few years back, I think like 3 years ago, maybe 4, where the study wasn't like African history because they may be too young to go through all of that, even though they can't understand pieces of it. But it was more of a geographical approach to studying Africa. But as we visited each land, and we studied all 54, including the mountains and the islands, etc. But as we go through, we learn basic, what I would call like fast facts. So the capital, the region, the currency, things like that. We learned some culture, some language. We cooked a recipe. from each land that we visited, and then they do learn some quick basic history about that particular nation, if you will. What else do we do there? We learn about some of the architecture that's there. Let's see. We learn about animals and nature and just popular places, tourist attractions like that for each land, that we visit. I do have them do a little bit of copy work, like African proverbs, and also recitations. Some of them they have to memorize and be able to explain to me as they can on a second grade level. And we also learn about some of the empires that are there, and we learn about just a little bit of some of the colonization that's there, like as Europeans begin to come in and how that looked, for Africa. And then we talk about each nation's independence. So what happened to them in order to be oppressed, like which European group did that, and then what was the effects of that people, and then how did Africa fight back, or how did that particular nation, Africa, fight back in order to gain that independence. And that's pretty much what we do. They do a lot of map work, and they are mostly able to tell me all of the countries that are in Africa, and lots of them. I work a lot on map skills, visual skills, the critical thinking behind all of that. They're able to just point to a blank map and tell me what's what. When I get to West Africa, because I do study it by region, so north, east, south, the central or sub-Saharan, and then west. I try to save the west. Well, I don't try, I do. I save the western region for the last part of that semester, because I do focus a little bit more on the West African people in history than I do the rest of the continent, and only to just explain to them that these are the shores in which our ancestors were picked up from and brought to the Americas. And so I put a little bit of history about that there. I don't go really deep into like the transatlantic slave trade because they are in second grade, but I do kind of hint at it and lead into it so that it's a nice segue in later years. Okay, and then we're moving on to third grade. Third grade, I do a general overview of world history. Lots of people ask me, oh, well, do you ever teach, any European history, be it Canadian history or Roman history or anything like that? Not so much, not an intentional year or semester of study on that land. I'm going to be very block focused when it comes to history. So, but obviously in an overview of world history, you're starting with what we understand to be the beginning of time or the first man, and I'm working myself all the way up until early American history, kind of like a little bit before Columbus. So obviously they're hearing about all different lands in world history and some of the leaders and major people that are present there. So obviously they hear about Europe and India and Asia and Africa, like, we go through in a world history course those 7 continents, even though we don't stick on Antarctica too much. And we talk about the people there, the religion there, what's going on, what happened in history. And then we're talking about how it's not just this single nation. How does this nation affect the world? Or how are they in relationship, whether it's positive or not, with other countries surrounding and abroad? So that's pretty much what third grade looks like, and it's a nice segue into grade 4, where we pick up with early American history. So I back up just a few years before Christopher Columbus, and I'm talking about some things going on basically in Portugal with our people prior to Columbus making his discoveries and explorations and stuff. And then, of course, we address Columbus and all that he did, and I take that up until Reconstruction period, so approximately 1870s. And so that is a good bit of slavery. Actually, it's the majority of it in America as we understand it, from 1619 until about 1865. So I'm backing up to a little bit mid 1400s until 1870. The majority of that is it, but I don't teach it from, the point of us being slaves. We really go deep into that. I personally wrote our early U.S. history curriculum. It is called Our History Revealed, Volume 1. And we had a great time doing that. I compiled a student journal to go with it for, students to be able to write in as young as first grade if parents wanted to do it that early, up until about 6th grade, 12 or 13. And my students really, really loved at the end of the school year having that keepsake and being able to thumb through and see, all that they learned. That was a really good year. And then in 5th grade, we pick up with modern U.S. history. So I pick up right where we left off in the 1880s Reconstruction period, and we go until 1963, right about where Malcolm X and Dr. King are getting ready to, do their thing with civil rights. I park it at 1963 for a reason. So the majority of what we're learning about is how African Americans are thriving in a post-slavery America. So obviously some big topics are Reconstruction, black codes, what else? Jim Crow, pre-civil rights, etc. So we just finished that year, this past school year, with the majority of my 5th graders. That was a very, very, very good year. They were very surprised to see all of this prominence and all of these accolades, that's been attributed to us. And then, some of the oppression. They were like, oh, wow. So when slavery ended, like a lot of how we were treated didn't go anywhere. And so that was a good year. All right. And then picking up after 5th grade, we go into 6th grade. And I'm going to explain why I do this in another video. So when I shoot it, I will be sure to come back and link it in the description box here. But we move on to the rest of the Americas. All right, so after we studied 2 years of American history, early and modern, which has covered from our inception in this country until about 1963, we moved to study the other Americas. So Central America, South America, and that is going to include the West Indies or the Caribbean islands and lands. Okay, and so, I'll give a little bit as to why. Because they have learned in world history and a little bit in early history that all of what is considered America. And so we've talked about North America, South America, Central America, even though obviously in those 2 years we focused on North, being actually in the United States. But I am sure to teach them that's all America. And as a matter of fact, before it started splitting up, it's called Mesoamerica, and I do explain that to them. So when we leave where we sit personally as African Americans in America, we go and visit the lands of Latin America and South America, or Central America, and we learn about the people of African descent there, as well as the other people groups that are there too, but we're going to focus on, where we are. And let's see, what do we talk about? We talk about, when we get to Central America and South America, I can talk about the oppression a little bit more in variety. So in America, it's just like all they know is, oh, well, we have these European oppressors, and this is how they treat us as we live among them. But when we get to Central America, South America, they're asking me like, well, why is this one speaking this language and this one speaking this one? And why does this one look like this and this one like this one? Where they don't really see that the variety in America, because it's just these 50 states and it's pretty much the same. There's a little small differences between West Coast, East Coast, and obviously the North and the South, but for the most part, that is what it is. So I'm able to go a whole lot more into how we're viewed as a people, and race relations, and just what we've done to survive and thrive despite some of the atrocities that have been done to us, and they can easily see it. So that is always a great course for students to participate in, especially coming right out of American history, because it's just that much more realized for them. All right, and then in 7th grade, we move on to world history and world geography. I can do so much more with them 4 years later. The last time we did world history or overview of world history, it was in grade 3. And so now we're moving on to grade 7, where we're doing world history and we can go in a little bit more. And I also add geography there. And it's not because they're not getting geography in 3rd grade, but they did a lot of geography in 1st and 2nd grade. And so I kind of just study the history in 3rd grade, even though we do some mapping that is pretty much comes with the territory with history. But we specifically study geography and world history side by side in grade 7. And then after that, in grade 8, I pick up with that last installment of modern U.S. history, where we begin about 1963, 64, and we go on to modern times. And the reason that I save, well, there's a few reasons, but I'll explain one now, that I saved that particular period of time, that 1960s to today, for modern U.S., for 8th grade, is because there are lots of topics to cover in that 50, 60 years, and I think it's best realized if they are a little bit older for how I want to teach it. And I'm not saying that there aren't things for students to learn younger than that during that period of time, because I bring up stuff all the time, to them. And as current events happens, I have to link back to things that did happen between the 60s and, let's say, the 90s. So not saying that, but for how I teach it and the goals that I have and what I really want them to walk away with learning, because I'm not sure that they're going to get it anywhere else except for maybe college or their own self-study. And even in college, they would have to, specifically choose African-American courses, all of that jazz. So I really try to, 8th grade is kind of my last hoo-ha-ha for you guys to get this, because in high school, for the most part, students follow a traditional high school track in order to meet the graduation criteria in order to, be able to get into college and move on. So it's not as flexible. The 4-year high school plan isn't as flexible as, you haven't been able to do your own thing K through 8. So that's what I do. After 8th grade, my word to you is to follow your 4-year track in order to graduate. And some states have more flexibility on that, some don't. But I'm not going to go through, do this in 9th, do this in 10th, etc., because I want you to follow whatever your state says to follow in order for your child to be awarded a diploma in that state. All right, so that is my K through 8 history plan to just go through in summary. So kindergarten, community helpers, African American bios. 1st grade, me on the map, national, state, history with African American inventors. Grade 2, Africa, but more of a geographical approach instead of a historical one, even though there is some history. Grade 3, an overview of world history. Grade 4, early U.S. history. Grade 5, modern U.S. history. Grade 6, Latin American and South American history. Grade 7, world history and geography. Grade 8, modern history, 1964, 1965, until current times. Oh, I'm sorry, I left out something in 8th grade. In 8th grade, it only takes me a semester to do 1964 into current times. So the second semester, we do state study, which obviously the last time they've had that was in 1st grade, so we're able to go a little bit more into that. All right, hopefully that answers all the questions that I've received and that has been helpful to you in some way. If you like this video, please subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Shalom.